The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, stanzas translated with commentaries, from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 12 continued. The quote curse, unquote, from a philosophical point of view. The foregoing teachings of the Secret Doctrine, supplemented by the universal traditions, must now have demonstrated that the Brahmanas and Puranas, the Yathas, and other Mazdean scriptures, down to the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman, and finally to the Jewish sacred records, all have the same origin. None are the meaningless and baseless stories invented to entrap the unwary profane. All are allegories intended to convey, under a more or less fantastic veil, the great truths gathered in the same field of prehistoric tradition. Space forbids us from entering in these two volumes into further and more minute details with respect to the four races which preceded our own. But before offering to the student the history of the psychic and spiritual evolution of the direct antediluvian fathers of our fifth Aryan humanity, and before demonstrating its bearing upon all the other side branches grown from the same trunk, we have to elucidate a few more facts. It has been shown on the evidence of the whole ancient literary world, and the intuitional speculations of more than one philosopher and scientist of the later ages, that the tenets of our esoteric doctrine are corroborated by inferential as well as by direct proof in almost every case. That neither the legendary giants nor the lost continents, nor yet the evolution of the preceding races are quite baseless tales. In the addenda which close this volume, science will find itself more than once unable to reply. They will, it is hoped, finally dispose of every skeptical remark with regard to the sacred number in nature and our figures in general. Vide sections on the septenaries. Meanwhile, one task is left incomplete, that of disposing of that most pernicious of all the theological dogmas, the curse under which mankind is alleged to have suffered ever since the supposed disobedience of Adam and Eve in the bower of Eden. Creative powers in man were the gift of divine wisdom, not the result of sin. This is clearly instanced in the paradoxical behavior of Jehovah, who first curses Adam and Eve, or humanity, for the supposed committed crime, and then blesses his, quote, chosen people, unquote, by saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth," in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1. The curse was not brought on mankind by the fourth race, for the comparatively sinless third race, the still more gigantic antediluvians, had perished in the same way. Hence the deluge was no punishment, but simply a result of a periodical and geological law. Nor was the curse of karma called down upon them for seeking natural union, as all the mindless animal world does in its proper seasons, but for abusing the creative power, for desecrating the divine gift, and wasting the life essence for no purpose, except bestial, personal gratification. When understood, the third chapter of Genesis will be found to refer to the Adam and Eve of the closing third and the commencing fourth races. In the beginning, conception was as easy for woman as it was for all animal creation. Nature had never intended that woman should bring forth her young ones in sorrow. Since that period, however, during the evolution of the fourth race, there came enmity between its seed and the serpent's seed, the seed or product of karma and divine wisdom. For the seed of woman or lust bruised the head of the seed of the fruit of wisdom and knowledge by turning the holy mystery of procreation into animal gratification. Hence the law of karma bruised the heel of the Atlantean race by gradually changing physiologically, morally, physically, and mentally the whole nature of the fourth race of mankind, until, from the healthy king of animal creation of the third race, man became in the fifth, our race, a helpless, scrofulous being, and has now become the wealthiest heir on the globe to constitutional and hereditary diseases, the most consciously and intelligently bestial of all animals. Notes: how wise and grand, how far-seeing and morally beneficent are the laws of Manu on connubial life, when compared with the license tacitly allowed to man in civilized countries. That those laws have been neglected for the last 2 millenniums does not prevent us from admiring their forethought. The Brahmin was a grihasta, a family man, till a certain period of his life, when after begetting a son he broke with married life and became a chaste yogi. His very connubial life was regulated by his Brahmin astrologer in accordance with his nature. Therefore, in such countries as the Punjab, for instance, where the lethal influence of Mussulman, and later on of European, licentiousness has hardly touched the orthodox Aryan castes, one still finds the finest men, so far as stature and physical strength go, on the whole globe, whereas the mighty men of old have found themselves replaced in the Deccan, and especially in Bengal, by men whose generation becomes with every century, and almost with every year, dwarfed and weakened. Diseases and overpopulation are facts that can never be denied. End of note. This is the real curse from the physiological standpoint, almost the only one touched upon in the Kabbalistic esotericism. Viewed from this aspect, the curse is undeniable, for it is evident. The intellectual evolution, in its progress hand in hand with the physical, has certainly been a curse instead of a blessing, a gift quickened by the lords of wisdom, who have poured on the human manas the fresh dew of their own spirit and essence. The divine Titan has then suffered in vain, and one feels inclined to regret his benefaction to mankind, and sigh for those days so graphically depicted by Aeschylus in his Prometheus Bound, when, at the close of the first Titanic age, the age that followed that of ethereal man, of the pious Kandu and Pramloka, nascent, physical mankind, still mindless and physiologically senseless, is described as, quote, "Seeing they saw in vain, hearing they heard not, but like shapes in dreams, through the long time all things at random mixed." Unquote. Our saviors, the Agnishwata and other divine sons of the flame of wisdom, personified by the Greeks in Prometheus, may well, in the injustice of the human heart, be left unrecognized and unthanked. Note: in Mrs. Anna Swanwick's volumes, The Dramas of Aeschylus, it is said of Prometheus Bound, Volume 2, pages 146 and 147, that Prometheus truly appears in it as the champion and benefactor of mankind, whose condition is depicted as weak and miserable in the extreme. Zeus, it is said, proposed to annihilate these puny ephemerals, and to plant upon the earth a new race in their stead. We see the lords of being doing likewise, and exterminating the first product of nature and the sea in the stanzas, 5 et sequens. Prometheus represents himself as having frustrated this design, and as being consequently subjected for the sake of mortals to the most agonizing pain inflicted by the remorseless cruelty of Zeus. We have thus the Titan, the symbol of finite reason and free will, of intellectual humanity, or the high aspect of Manas, depicted as the sublime philanthropist, while Zeus, the supreme deity of Hellas, is portrayed as the cruel and obdurate despot, a character peculiarly revolting to Athenian sentiment. The reason for it is explained further on. The supreme deity bears, in every ancient pantheon, including that of the Jews, a dual character composed of light and shadow. End of note. They may, in our ignorance of the truth, be indirectly cursed for Pandora's gift, but to find themselves proclaimed and declared by the mouth of the clergy the evil ones is too heavy a karma for him who dared alone, when Zeus ardently desired to quench the entire human race, to save that mortal race from perdition. Or, as the suffering Titan is made to say, quote, "From sinking blasted down to Hades' gloom, for this by the dire tortures I am bent, grievous to suffer, piteous to behold, I who did mortals pity," unquote. And the chorus remarking very pertinently, "Vast boon was this thou gavest unto mortals." Prometheus answers, "Yea, and besides 'twas I that gave them fire." Chorus, "Have now these short-lived creatures flamed-eyed fire?" Prometheus, "Aye, and by it full many arts will learn." But with the arts, the fire received has turned into the greatest curse, the animal element, and consciousness of its possession has changed periodical instinct into chronic animalism and sensuality. Note: the animal world, having simple instinct to guide it, has its seasons of procreation, and the sexes become neutralized during the rest of the year. Therefore, the free animal knows sickness but once in its life, before it dies. End of note. It is this which hangs over humanity like a heavy funeral pall. Thus arises the responsibility of free will. The titanic passions which represent humanity in its darkest aspects, the restless insatiability of the lower passions and desires when, with self-asserting insolence, they bid defiance to the restraints of law. Note: from Introduction to Prometheus Bound, page 152. End of note. Prometheus, having endowed man, according to Plato's Protagoras, with that wisdom which ministers to physical well-being, but the lower aspect of manas of the animal, karma, having remained unchanged, instead of an untainted mind, heaven's first gift, from Aeschylus, there was created the eternal vulture of the ever unsatisfied desire, of regret and despair, coupled with the dreamlike feebleness that fetters the blind race of mortals, from page 556, until the day when Prometheus is released by his heaven-appointed deliverer, Heracles. Now Christians, Roman Catholics especially, have tried to prophetically connect this drama with the coming of Christ. No greater mistake could be made. The true theosophist, the pursuer of divine wisdom and worshipper of absolute perfection, the unknown deity which is neither Zeus nor Jehovah, will demur to such an idea. Pointing to antiquity, he will prove that there never was an original sin, but only an abuse of physical intelligence, the psychic being guided by the animal, and both putting out the light of the spiritual. He will say, "All ye who can read between the lines, study ancient wisdom in the old dramas, the Indian and the Greek. Read carefully the one just mentioned, one enacted on the theatres of Athens 2,400 years ago, namely Prometheus Bound. The myth belongs to neither Hesiod or Aeschylus, but, as Bunsen says it, is older than the Hellenes themselves, for it belongs in truth to the dawn of human consciousness." The crucified Titan is the personified symbol of the collective logos, the host, and of the laws of wisdom, or the heavenly man who incarnated in humanity. Moreover, as his name Prometheus, meaning he who sees before him, or futurity, shows, in the arts he devised and taught to humanity, psychological insight was not the least. Note: from Prometheus, Forethought. Professor Kuhn, we are told in the above-named volumes of The Dramas of Aeschylus, considers the name of the Titan to be derived from the Sanskrit word pramanta, the instrument used for kindling fire. The root mand or mant, implies rotary motion, and the word mantami, used to denote the process of fire kindling, acquired the secondary sense of snatching away. Hence we find another word of the same stock, pramata, signifying theft. This is very ingenious, but perhaps not altogether correct. Besides, there's a very prosaic element in it. No doubt in physical nature the higher forms may develop from the lower ones, but it is hardly so in the world of thought. And as we are told that the word mantami passed into the Greek language and became the word mantano, to learn, that is to say, to appropriate knowledge, whence prometia, foreknowledge, forethought, we may find in searching a more poetical origin of the firebringer than that displayed in its Sanskrit origin. The svastika, the sacred sign and the instrument for kindling sacred fire, may explain it better. Prometheus, the firebringer, is the pramanta personified, goes on the author. He finds his prototype in the Aryan Matarisvan, a divine personage closely associated with the fire god of the Veda, Agni. Mati in Sanskrit is understanding, and a synonym of Mahat and Manas, and must be of some account in the origin of the name. Promati is the son of Fohat, and has his story also. End of note. For as he, Prometheus, complains to the daughters of Oceanus, of prophecies the various modes I fixed, and among dreams did first discriminate the truthful vision, and mortals guided to a mysterious art, all arts to mortals, from Prometheus came. Leaving for a few pages the main subject, let us pause and see what may be the hidden meaning of this, the most ancient, as it is the most suggestive of traditional allegories. As it relates directly to the early races, this will be no real digression. The subject of Aeschylus' drama, the trilogy is lost, is known to all cultured readers. The demigod robs the gods, the Elohim, of their secret, the mystery of the creative fire. For this sacrilegious attempt, he is struck down by Kronos and delivered unto Zeus, the father and creator of a mankind which he would wish to have blind, intellectually and animal-like, a personal deity which will not see man like one of us. Note on Kronos. Kronos is time, and thus the allegory becomes very suggestive. See closing pages of this subsection. End of note. Hence Prometheus, the fire and light-giver, is chained on Mount Caucasus and condemned to suffer torture. But the triform Phates, Karma, whose decrees, as the Titan says, even Zeus, e'en he the foreordained cannot escape, ordain that those sufferings will last only to that day when a son of Zeus, a son bearing stronger than his sire, 787, one of thine, Io's, own descendants it must be, 791, is born. This son will deliver Prometheus, that is the suffering humanity, from his own fatal gift. His name is He who has to come. On the authority, then, of these few lines, which, like any other allegorical sentence, may be twisted into almost any meaning, namely, on the word pronounced by Prometheus and addressed to Io, the daughter of Inachus, persecuted by Zeus, a whole prophecy is constructed by some Catholic writers, says the crucified Titan, and portent past belief, the speaking oaks, by which full clearly, in no riddling phrase, wast hailed as the illustrious spouse of Zeus. Then verse 853, stroking thee with touch alone of unalarming hand. Then thou dark Epaphus shalt bear, whose name records his sacred gendering. Verse 870. This was construed by several fanatics, de Mousseau and de Merville amongst others, into a clear prophecy. Io, quote, is the mother of God, we are told, and Dark Epaphos, Christ. But the latter has not dethroned his father except metaphorically, if one has to regard Jehovah as that father, nor has the Christian Saviour hurled his father down into Hades. Prometheus says in verse 930 that Zeus will be humbled yet, as for himself, quote, such marriage he prepares, which from his throne of power to nothingness shall hurl him down, so shall be all fulfilled his father Kronos' curse. Note, see for explanation of this curse the last page of the present subsection. End of note. Then let him sit confiding in his lofty thunder peals, and wielding with both hands the fiery bolt. For these shall not avail, but fall he shall, a fall disgraceful, not to be endured. Unquote. Verse 980. Dark Epaphos was the Dionysus Sabazius, the son of Zeus and of Demeter in the Sabazian mysteries, during which the father of the gods, assuming the shape of a serpent, begot on Demeter, Dionysus, or the soul of Bacchus. Io is the moon, and at the same time the eve of a new race, and so is Demeter in the present case. The Promethean myth is a prophecy indeed, but it does not relate to any of the cyclic saviors who have appeared periodically in various countries and among various nations in their transitionary conditions of evolution. It points to the last of the mysteries of cyclic transformations in the series of which mankind, having passed from the ethereal to the solid physical state, from spiritual to physiological procreation, is now carried onward on the opposite arc of the cycle toward that second phase of its primitive state, when woman knew no man, and human progeny was created, not begotten. That state will return to it, and to the world at large, when the latter shall discover and really appreciate the truths which underlie this vast problem of sex. It will be like the light that never shone on sea or land, and has to come to men through the Theosophical Society. That light will lead on and up to the true spiritual intuition. Then, as expressed once in a letter to a Theosophist, the world will have a race of Buddhas and Christs, for the world will have discovered that individuals have it in their own powers to procreate Buddha-like children or demons. When that knowledge comes, all dogmatic religions, and with these the demons, will die out. If we reflect upon the serial development of the allegory and the character of the heroes, the mystery may be unriddled. Kronos is of course time in its cyclic course. He swallows his children, the personal gods of exoteric dogmas included. He has swallowed, instead of Zeus, his stone idol. But the symbol has grown and has only developed in human fancy as mankind was cycling down toward only its physical and intellectual, not spiritual, perfection. When it is as far advanced in its spiritual evolution, Kronos will be no longer deceived. Instead of the stone image, he will have swallowed the anthropomorphic fiction itself, because the serpent of wisdom, represented in the Sabazian mysteries by the anthropomorphized Logos, the unity of spiritual and physical powers, will have begotten in time Kronos, a progeny, Dionysus Bacchus, or the dark Epaphos, the mighty one, the race that will overthrow him. Where will he be born? Prometheus traces him to his origin and birthplace in his prophecy to Io. Io is the moon goddess of generation, for she is Isis and she is Eve, the Great Mother. Note, it is complained by the author of the version on and translator of Prometheus Bound that in this tracing of Io's wanderings no consistency with our known geography is attainable. See page 191 of Volume 2. There may be good reason for it. First of all, it is the journey and wandering from place to place of the race from which the 10th, or Kalki avatar so-called, is to issue. This he calls the kingly race born in Argos, 888. But Argos has no reference here to Argos in Greece. It comes from Arg, or Arka, the female generative power symbolized in the moon, the navy-formed Arga of the mysteries, meaning the Queen of Heaven. Eustathius shows that, in the dialect of the Argians, Io signified the moon, while esotericism explains it as the divine androgyne, or the mystic 10. In Hebrew, 10 is the perfect number, or Jehovah. Argia in Sanskrit is the libation cup, the navy form or boat-shaped vessel in which flowers and fruit are offered to the deities. Argyanath is a title of the Mahakohan, meaning the Lord of Libations, and Argyavarsha, the land of libations, is the mystery name of that region which extends from the Kailas mountain nearly to the Skama desert, from within which the Kalki avatar is expected. The Ariana Varsetia of the Zoroastrians, as a locality, is identical with it. It is now said to have been situated between the Sea of Aral, Baltistan, and Little Tibet, but in olden times its area was far larger, and it was the birthplace of physical humanity, of which Io is the mother and symbol. End of note. He traces the path of the racial wanderings as plainly as words can express it. She has to quit Europe and go to Asia's continent, reaching there the highest of the mountains of Caucasus, 737, the Titan telling her, "When thou hast crossed the flood, limit betwixt the two continents, fronting the burning east," 810, that she must travel eastward after passing the Cimmerian Bosphorus, and cross what is evidently the Volga and now Astrakhan on the Caspian Sea. After this she will encounter fierce northern blasts, and cross thither to the land of the Arimaspian host, east of Herodotus' Scythia, to Pluto's gold-abounding flood, 825, which is rightly conjectured by Professor Newman to have meant the Ural, the Arimaspi of Herodotus being the recognized inhabitants of this golden region. And here comes, between verses 825 and 835, a puzzle to all the European interpreters. Says the Titan, "To these, Arimaspi and Gripes, approach not, a far borderland thou next wilt reach, where dwells a swarthy race, near the sun's founts, where is the Aethiop, quote, river, unquote. Along its banks proceed till thou attain the mighty rapids, where from Bibline heights pure draughts of sacred water Nailos sends," unquote. There Io was ordained to found a colony for herself and sons. Now we must see how the passage is interpreted. As Io is told that she has to travel eastward till she comes to the river Aethiops, which she is to follow till it falls into the Nile, hence the perplexity. According to the geographical theories of the earliest Greeks, we are informed by the author of the version on Prometheus Bound, this condition was fulfilled by the river Indus. Arrian mentions that Alexander the Great, when preparing to sail down the Indus, having seen crocodiles in the river Indus, and in no other river except the Nile, seemed to himself to have discovered the source of the Nile, as though the Nile, rising from some place in India and flowing through much desert land, and thereby losing its name Indus, next flowed through inhabited land, being now called the Nile by the Ethiopians of the great parts, and afterwards by the Egyptians. Virgil, in the 4th Georgic, echoes the absolute error on page 197 from Volume 2. Both Alexander and Virgil may have erred considerably in their geographical notions, but the prophecy of Prometheus has not so sinned in the least, not at any rate in its esoteric spirit. When a certain race is symbolized, and events pertaining to its history are rendered allegorically, no topographical accuracy ought to be expected in the itinerary traced for its personification. Yet it so happens that the river Ethiops is certainly the Indus, and it is also the Nile, or Nila. It is the river born of the Kailas, heaven mountain, the mansion of the gods, 22,000 feet above the level of the sea. It was the Ethiops river because its banks, from Attok down to Sind, were peopled by tribes generally referred to as the Eastern Ethiopians. India and Egypt were two kindred nations, and the Eastern Ethiopians, the mighty builders, have come from India, as is pretty well proved, it is hoped, in Isis Unveiled. See Volume 1, pages 569 to 70. Then why could not Alexander, and even the learned Virgil, have used the word Nile or Nalos when speaking of the Indus, since it is one of its names? To this day that river is called, in the regions around Kalabag, Nil, meaning blue, and Nila, the blue river. The water here is of such dark blue color that the name given to it from time immemorial led to a small town on its banks being called by the same name. It exists to this day. Evidently Arian, who wrote far later than the day of Alexander, and who was ignorant of the old name of the Indus, has unconsciously slandered the Greek conqueror. Nor are our modern historians much wiser in judging as they do, for they often make the most sweeping declarations on mere appearances, as much as their ancient colleagues ever did in days of old, when no encyclopedias were yet ready for them. The race of Io, the cow-horned maid, is then simply the first pioneer race of the Ethiopians brought by her from the Indus to the Nile, which received its name in memory of the mother river of the colonists from India. Note: Alexander, who was better acquainted with Attok than with India, where he never went, could not have failed to hear the Indus near its very sources called Nil and Nila. Even if a mistake, it is thus easily accounted for. End of note. For does not Prometheus say to Io that the sacred Nalos, the god, not the river, he to the land three-cornered thee shall guide, namely to the delta, where his sons are foreordained to found that far-off colony? Verse 830, et sequens. Note on Io. That Io is identical allegorically with Isis and the moon is shown by her being cow-horned. The allegory undeniably reached Greece from India, where Vak, the melodious cow, from Rigveda, from whom mankind was produced, from Bhagavad Purana, is shown in the Aitareya Brahmana as pursued by her father Brahma, who was moved by an illicit passion and changed her into a deer. Hence Io, refusing to yield to Jupiter's passion, becomes horned. The cow was in every country the symbol of the passive generative power of nature, Isis, Vak, Venus, the mother of the prolific god of love, Cupid, but at the same time that of the Logos, whose symbol became with the Egyptians and the Indians the bull, as testified to by Apis and the Hindu bulls in the most ancient temples. In esoteric philosophy, the cow is the symbol of creative nature, and the bull, her calf, the spirit which vivifies her, or the Holy Spirit, as Mr. Kinneler shows. Hence the symbol of the horns. These were sacred also with the Jews, who placed near the altar horns of shittim wood, by seizing which a criminal ensured his safety. End of note. It is there that the new race, the Egyptians, will begin, and a female race, 873, which, fifth in descent from dark Epaphos, 50 in number shall return to Argos. Then one of the 50 virgins will fail through love and shall a kingly race in Argos bear. But from this seed shall dauntless heroes spring, bow famous, who shall free me from these ills. When this hero shall rise, the Titan does not reveal, for, as he remarks, this to set forth a large needs lengthy speech. But Argos is Argia Varsha, the land of libation of the old Hierophants, whence the deliverer of humanity will appear, a name which becomes ages later that of its neighbor, India, the Aryavarta of old. That the subject formed part of the Sabaean mysteries is made known by several ancient writers, by Cicero and by Clemens Alexandrinus. The latter writers are the only ones who attribute the fact that Aeschylus was charged by the Athenians with sacrilege and condemned to be stoned to death to its true cause. They say that, having been himself uninitiated, Aeschylus had profaned the mysteries by exposing them in his trilogies on a public stage. Note: Herodotus and Pausanias supposed that the cause of the condemnation was that Aeschylus, adopting the theogony of the Egyptians, made Diana the daughter of Ceres and not of Latona. But Aeschylus was initiated. End of note. But he would have incurred the same condemnation had he been initiated, which must have been the case, as otherwise he must, like Socrates, have had a daemon to reveal to him the secret and sacred allegorical drama of initiation. At all events, it is not the father of the Greek tragedy who invented the prophecy of Prometheus, for he only repeated in dramatic form that which was revealed by the priests during the mysteria of the Sabaeia. Note: Sabaeia was a periodical festival with mysteries enacted in honor of some gods, a variant of the Mithraic mysteries. The whole evolution of the races was performed in them. End of note. The latter, however, is one of the oldest sacred festivals whose origin is to this day unknown to history. Mythologists connect it through Mithras, the sun, called Sabaeus and uncalled Sabaeus on some old monuments, with Jupiter and Bacchus. But it was never the property of the Greeks, but dates from days immemorial. The translators of the drama wonder how Aeschylus could become guilty of such discrepancy between the character of Zeus as portrayed in the Prometheus Bound and that depicted in the remaining dramas. Note Mrs. A. Swanwick. This is just because Aeschylus, like Shakespeare, was and will ever remain the intellectual sphinx of the ages. Between Zeus, the abstract deity of Grecian thought, and the Olympic Zeus, there was an abyss. The latter represented during the mysteries no higher a principle than the low aspect of human physical intelligence, manas wedded to karma, Prometheus in its divine aspect merging into and aspiring to buddhi, the divine soul. Zeus was the human soul and nothing more, whenever shown yielding to his lower passions. The jealous god, revengeful and cruel in his egotism, or I-amness. Hence Zeus is represented as a serpent, the intellectual tempter of man, which nevertheless begets in the course of cyclic evolution the man-savior, the solar Bacchus or Dionysus, more than a man. Dionysus is one with Osiris, with Krishna, and with Buddha, the heavenly wise, and with the coming 10th avatar, the glorified spiritual Christos, who will deliver the suffering Christos, mankind, or Prometheus on its trial. This, say Brahminical and Buddhistic legends, echoed by the Zoroastrian and now by the Christian teachings, the latter only occasionally, will happen at the end of Kali Yuga. It is only after the appearance of Kalki Avatar, or Sosios, that man will be born from woman without sin. Then will Brahma, the Hindu deity, Ahura Mazda, or Majd, the Zoroastrian, Zeus, the Greek Olympian Don Juan, Jehovah the jealous, repenting, cruel, tribal god of the Israelites, and all their likes in the universal pantheon of human fancy vanish and disappear in thin air, and along with these will vanish their shadows, the dark aspects of all those deities, ever represented as their twin brothers and creatures, in exoteric legend their own reflection on earth, in esoteric philosophy. The Ahrimans and Typhons, the Samuels and Satans, must be all dethroned on that day, when every dark evil passion will be subdued. There is one eternal law in nature, one that always tends to adjust contraries and to produce final harmony. It is owing to this law of spiritual development superseding the physical and purely intellectual that mankind will become freed from its false gods and find itself finally self-redeemed. In its final revelation, the old myth of Prometheus, his proto- and antitypes being found in every ancient theogony, stands in each of them at the very origin of physical evil, because at the threshold of human physical life. Kronos is time whose first law is that the order of the successive and harmonious phases in the process of evolution during cyclic development should be strictly preserved, under the severe penalty of abnormal growth, with all its ensuing results. It was not in the program of natural development that man, a higher animal though he may be, should become at once intellectually, spiritually, and physically the demigod he is on earth, while his physical frame remains weaker and more helpless and ephemeral than that of almost any huge mammal. The contrast is too grotesque and violent, the tabernacle much too unworthy of its indwelling God. The gift of Prometheus thus became a curse, though foreknown and foreseen by the host personified in that personage, as his name well shows. Note, vide supra a footnote concerning the etymology of Prometheus, or forethought. Prometheus confesses it in the drama when saying, "O holy ether, swiftly winged gales, behold what I, a god from gods, endure, and yet what say I? Clearly I foreknew all that must happen. The destined it behooves, as best I may to bear, for well I wot how incontestable the strength of fate." Verse 105. Fate stands here for karma or nemesis. End of note. It is in this that rests, at one and the same time, its sin and its redemption. For the host that incarnated in a portion of humanity, though led to it by karma or nemesis, preferred free will to passive slavery, intellectual self-conscious pain and even torture, while myriad time shall flow to inane, imbecile, instinctual beatitude. Knowing such an incarnation was premature and not in the program of nature, the heavenly host Prometheus still sacrificed itself to benefit thereby at least one portion of mankind. Note: mankind is obviously divided into God-informed man and lower human creatures. The intellectual difference between the Aryans and other civilized nations and such savages as the South Sea Islanders is inexplicable, and no amount of culture nor generations of training amid civilization could raise such human specimens as the Bushmen, the Vedas of Ceylon, and some African tribes to the same intellectual level as the Aryans, the Semites, and the Turanians, so-called. The sacred spark is missing in them, and it is they who are the only inferior races on the globe, now happily, owing to the wise adjustment of nature, which ever works in that direction, fast dying out. Verily mankind is of one blood, but not of the same essence. We are the hothouse, artificially quickened plants in nature, having in us a spark, which in them is latent. End of note. But while saving man from mental darkness, they inflicted upon him the tortures of the self-consciousness of his responsibility, the result of his free will, besides every ill to which mortal man and flesh are heir to. This torture Prometheus accepted for himself, since the host became henceforward blended with the tabernacle prepared for them, which was still unachieved at that period of formation. Spiritual evolution, being incapable of keeping pace with the physical, once its homogeneity was broken by the admixture, the gift thus became the chief cause, if not the sole origin of evil. Note: the philosophical view of Indian metaphysics placed the root of evil in the differentiation of the homogeneous into the heterogeneous, of the unit into plurality. End of note. The allegory which shows Kronos cursing Zeus for dethroning him in the primitive golden age of Saturn when all men were demigods, and creating a physical race of men weak and helpless in comparison, and then as delivering to his, Zeus, revenge the culprit, who despoiled the gods of their prerogative of creation, and who thereby raised man to their level, intellectually and spiritually, is highly philosophical. In the case of Prometheus, Zeus represents the host of the primeval progenitors of the Pitar, the fathers who created man senseless and without any mind, while the divine Titan stands for the spiritual creators, the Devas, who fell into generation. The former are spiritually lower but physically stronger than the Prometheans. Therefore the latter are shown conquered. The lower host, whose work the Titan spoiled, and thus defeated the plans of Zeus, was on this earth in its own sphere and plane of action, whereas the superior host was an exile from heaven who had got entangled in the meshes of matter. They, the inferior host, were masters of all the cosmic and lower titanic forces. The high Titan possessed only the intellectual and spiritual fire. This drama of the struggle of Prometheus with the Olympic tyrant and despot, sensual Zeus, one sees enacted daily within our actual mankind. The lower passions chain the higher aspirations to the rock of matter, to generate in many a case the vulture of sorrow, pain, and repentance. In every such case one sees once more a god in fetters, anguish fraught, the foe Zeus, in hatred held by all. A god bereft even of that supreme consolation of Prometheus, who suffered in the self-sacrifice, for that to men he bare too fond a mind, as the divine Titan is moved by altruism, but the mortal man by selfishness and egoism in every instance. The modern Prometheus has now become Epimetheus, he who sees only after the event, because the universal philanthropy of the former has long ago degenerated into selfishness and self-adoration. Man will re-become the free Titan of old, but not before cyclic evolution has re-established the broken harmony between the two natures, the terrestrial and the divine, after which he becomes imperishable to the lower titanic forces, invulnerable in his personality, and immortal in his individuality, which cannot happen before every animal element is eliminated from his nature. When man understands that Deus non fecit mortem, that man has created it himself, he will re-become the Prometheus before his fall. For the full symbolism of Prometheus and the origin of this mythos in Greece, the reader is referred to part 2 of this volume, chapter A Second Key to Prometheus, etc. In the said part, a kind of supplement to the present portion, every additional information is given upon those tenets that will be the most controverted and questioned. This work is so heterodox, when confronted with the acknowledged standards of theology and modern science, that no proof which tends to show that these standards often usurp an illegal authority should be neglected. Next, stanza 12 continues with additional fragments from a commentary on the verses of stanza 12.